Welcome to On Background. I'm Ed O'Keefe in today for Nia Malika Henderson. We're exploring the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa who died at the age of 95 on Thursday. And we're doing it in really the best way we know how, by talking to some of our colleagues who have spent time in South Africa reporting on Mandela, on the evolution of that country, and on the African continent as a whole. I'm joined today by Steve Mufson, who covered South Africa for the Wall Street Journal and Business Week in the mid-1980s, Craig Timberg, who was our Johannesburg bureau chief from 2004 to 2008, and in Johannesburg today, Sudarsan Raghavan, who covers the vast expanse of Africa for the Washington Post. As you see here on the cover of the paper today, "A Nation's Healer is Dead." Sudarsan co-wrote our obituary of Mandela along with our late colleague Lynn Duke. And Sudarsan, I want to begin with you. I know you've just arrived in the last few hours in South Africa. Wanted to get a sense of sort of how the country and the continent is responding to the news of his passing.
Well, it's both a nation and a continent mourning, actually. I mean, this was expected. He's been critically ill for months now, and so it didn't come entirely as a shock to people that he passed away last night. But at the same time, you know, this man is considered by, I would say, virtually everyone on this continent and probably around the world as one of the greatest statesmen in history, and particularly important to the African continent for what he's done in terms of bringing freedom, justice, and equality to South Africa. What we're seeing today is, you know, crowds have converged on his home in Houghton, which is an upscale Johannesburg suburb, as well as in Pretoria at the seats of government, even in a mall in another upscale neighborhood where there's a giant statue of Nelson Mandela, a square named after him.
Sudarsan, give us a sense of how the country is preparing to pay tribute to him. I saw just in the last...
you guys are breaking up.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Perfect, yeah.
What I was asking you is give us a sense of what the tribute to him will be like in the coming days across the country.
Well, already what you're seeing, I mean, they've just announced that the funeral is going to be on December 15th, after 10 days of mourning, basically, in South Africa. There's also going to be an event, another memorial at a large Johannesburg stadium on December 10th as well. And so you are seeing this process of mourning evolve over the next few days. What we're seeing on the ground today is crowds converging at his house, Mandela's house in Houghton, which is an upscale Johannesburg suburb, as well as other parts of Johannesburg, Pretoria, where people are, basically leaving flowers, notes, any way they can show their feelings for this great man. And also countries like Tanzania and Kenya have also announced 3 days or more of mourning for Mandela. So his death has gripped the entire continent.
In fact, I know here in the United States, President Obama last night ordered that U.S. flags should be lowered to half-staff through at least Monday in tribute to him, so the tributes continue around the world. Part of the reason I wanted Steve and Craig to join us is because you covered the country and the man at different periods of his life. Steve, you were there in the 80s, and you were reminding me that for much of that time, of course, he was classified as a terrorist, not yet considered the global icon that he became. Talk a little bit about that transition that took place during the 80s that took him from what was officially a terrorist in the eyes of the United States to a revered figure who only a few years later ended up greeting thousands of people in the streets of Washington.
Sure. Well, the transition was in our minds, not in his. I mean, he has been incredibly constant in his politics and his beliefs since before Eisenhower was elected president. He's been a national leader for the African National Congress that long. And in the mid-'80s, when I was there, politics were really all about Nelson Mandela in a lot of ways, even though he was in jail. And there was a lot of speculation about what kind of person he would be. One of the ways we tried to decipher that is, both people who had contact with him in prison and the things he did from prison. He was allowed to send out 3 letters a month, which he did, and he did in a way that, even though these letters didn't say too much of political substance, were already working at reconciliation, because he would not only write to his supporters in the African National Congress, but to white liberals in Parliament, to blacks who were in the apartheid structure in the homelands, who the African National Congress was very much opposed to, but he was still reaching out. So I think even in the 80s, it was clear that he was prepared to play a role of reconciliation that no other person in the country was really even thinking about at that point.
He was at the Robben Island prison for most of his imprisonment. You told me, reminded me that it was called, I think, Mandela University for a time.
Yeah, well, people who came out of it referred to it that way. And it was not as though there weren't a lot of other very senior and smart and savvy African National Congress leaders at Robben Island with him. But Mandela always had a special sort of presence and aura about him. And it wasn't a sort of prophetic, charismatic kind of presence. It was a very lawyerly, almost dull sort of presence. And in a way, that's what the country needed when he did come out. Someone who was not going to whip people up, but to calm people down and while inspiring them and protecting a system of the rule of law that we hope will withstand and outlive him.
Despite the fact that he's this icon, you and others have pointed out he wasn't that charismatic.
No, and but he's big. He has presence. He walks into a room and you definitely feel it. I mean, he came to visit us here at the Post, but dating back to the 50s when he was still handling court cases, and you talk to people who knew him then, and they say he walked into the courtroom and it just felt very different. He was an incredible figure. Of course, when I was there, it was mostly his absence that was the presence. But there was, I think, a clear sense that the country needed him, that there wasn't going to be any sort of deal that could stick that didn't involve Mandela. And I think ultimately a lot of white South Africans realized that. In a way, ironically, he was their best hope. Because if you thought that at some point that there was going to be some sort of transition, why not do it sooner before, if you're the national party, the white national party in South Africa, why not do it sooner when you are still relatively stronger? And why not do it with Mandela, who may be the only person in the country who could reach an agreement and see it to some sort of better system with still protections for minorities in the country?
Craig, you were there well after he had served as president, and really when he settled into this period of being the guy you saw on T-shirts or appearing at concerts, raising millions of dollars for AIDS research and for other diseases that were ravaging Africa. But you've spent a great amount of time studying the scourge of HIV and AIDS across the continent, and one of the things that most of the writing about him in the last few hours has pointed out is that he was someone who was very slow to acknowledge the epidemic that was ravaging not only his own country, but the entire continent.
It's hard to remember back to 1994 when multiracial democracy came to South Africa. It was also the moment that HIV was beginning to explode across the continent. Now, we now know that it already had moved into South Africa and most other parts of, or those parts of the continent, but people were beginning to get sick for the first time. This sense of crisis was beginning to build. But what the South Africans had on their mind was racial reconciliation. What the African National Congress had prepared itself for over years, really in some cases decades, was to rule a new kind of country. They were caught completely off guard by the intensity and the spread of HIV. And Mandela was certainly among those who just didn't see it coming, right? Didn't react quickly to it. There's a lot of people who think just by the very nature of being a man at that point in his 70s, sort of a patrician, part of a, descended from a royal family, that it was just a very difficult thing to talk about a disease that was mainly transmitted through sexual contact. So, and the country paid a very high price for this, and he paid a very high personal price. His own son died of AIDS while I was there, and and he has, since his presidency, has been very outspoken about the need to take more forceful action to deal with the AIDS epidemic. And it points was very critical of his successor, Thabo Mbeki, who of course was really a much more problematic figure in this story about South Africa not dealing quickly and effectively with the AIDS epidemic.
Sudarsan, now that he's gone, there's been some suggestion that the country's now going to be able to begin addressing a lot of the bigger political issues that they now face. The African National Congress, the party that he led, it has seen a bit of turmoil in recent years, certainly this year. Is there any sense yet of sort of what this means, his absence? What might the country now either begin to address or finally come to grips with that he's gone?
It's a very good question, and it's even as of now, it's a little bit unclear. I mean, certainly what we're seeing now with the African National Congress is that, over the past, several months, let's even say a year, there's been a gradual but growing disillusionment of the party, even from their core supporters, South Africa's black majority. I mean, it's not to say that the party is still extremely strong and is predicted to win the elections next year, but it has lost support amongst many of its core constituents. People are frustrated. There's many blacks still. They don't have electricity. They don't have housing. They don't have basic services. There's issues of corruption that goes all the way to the very top. President Jacob Zuma himself is embroiled over allegations that he spent $20 million of state funds to renovate his very luxurious private residence in KwaZulu-Natal province. So the ANC is currently facing a test of credibility amongst many South Africans, and with Mandela gone now, there's a sense that you could see other political players emerge on the scene and gain certainly more power. Already you're seeing new political players. There are several new parties that have propped up, that have come up in the recent months that are planning to challenge the ANC in next year's elections. The ANC has always revolved around Nelson Mandela. Even this summer when reports that he was dying surfaced, the ANC made a very prominent display of putting Mandela on posters and sending the ANC Youth League to sing and dance in front of the hospital. They were clearly saying that Mandela is theirs and they are the party of Mandela. But with his death now, it could very well allow these other political players to emerge and perhaps gain more political clout in the upcoming years.
We have to leave it there, unfortunately. But Sudarsan Raghavan, our chief Africa correspondent, Steve Mufson, who covered Africa in the 1980s, now one of our business correspondents, and Craig Timberg, who was there for the early part of the 21st century, and now one of our technology correspondents. Guys, thanks so much for doing this. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.